Sup y'all, and welcome to Cities and Urban Land Use, Part 11. And in this video, we're going to look at this essential question: how do cities function in the global periphery and semi-peripheral states? Now, recall that developed countries have cities that contain functional zonation through the strict enforcement of codes and laws. On the other hand, cities in developing countries have fewer zoning laws and often can only laxly enforce them, especially as the urban landscape expands outward. Looking at this map, there was a clear correlation between urbanization and overall wealth and development. However, some regions with very high rates of urbanization, such as South America, actually contain countries in the periphery and semi-periphery, and the region lacks true core countries. Looking at this map, you can see the fastest urban growth rates are usually found in the periphery and semi-periphery. And this is often a challenge for cities in developing countries, with burgeoning populations that often push the city resources past the brink. Looking at the classic concentric ring model based on the United States, you can see the CBD at the center with the industrial zone just outside, then followed by residential zones starting with the lower income population and proceeding outward to the medium income and finally the higher income earners. Compare that with this portrayal of the general urban layout in the majority of cities in the developing world. Since cities in these countries didn't experience much industrialization in the earliest 20th century, they did not establish much infrastructure to accommodate transport technology like streetcars or even automobiles. And as a result of this, the wealthier residents remained closer to the CBD and the central city. This trend has largely remained consistent in modern times. Further out, the medium income earners reside, and the poorest remain on the periphery, with industry building up on the outskirts of the city where land is affordable and the unskilled workers are close by. In some of the regions developing the fastest, new suburbs have been forming further out as well. To help analyze the land use and urban development of cities in more peripheral and semi-peripheral regions, we'll first investigate a well-established world regional model. In 1980, geographers Ernest Griffin and Larry Ford devised the Ibero or Latin American city model. In 1996, Ford presented a revised version that you see here. It consists of a series of sectors and zones. And as I showed you previously, the upper and middle class is generally closer to the CBD, whereas the poorer residents reside further outward, or in other words, quite opposite from cities in the US. To illustrate this model, we'll take a closer look at La Paz, Bolivia, beginning with the central city, divided into a CBD and a major market, what is referred to as El Centro in La Paz. This shows that many cities now have offices, hotels, entertainment, and retail structures in their downtowns as well as their original CBDs. Often, a central plaza is at the center with a CBD and market area. The next most affluent part of Latin American cities is the commercial spine, or infrastructure consisting of roads and public transportation as well as amenities attractive to the wealthy, such as water and electricity, as well as offices, shops, restaurants, parks, and various venues of entertainment. Strict zoning and land controls ensure the continuation of these activities, protecting elite from incursions by low-income squatters. This narrow spine, which is essentially an extension of the CBD, is surrounded by the elite residential sector. This is where nearly all of the city's professionally built houses are, and where most of the upper class and upper middle class live. A mall, or edge city, is often at the end of the spine to provide goods and services to those in the elite residential sector. The zone of maturity is located in the inner city and around the CBD. These areas have better constructed, or traditional colonial homes, and in many cities, the middle-income residents filtered in after the upper-class residents moved out to the elite sectors. The zone of maturity is an area of upward mobility, and parts of it may be gentrifying. Many Latin American cities now have middle-class housing tracts that are located close to the elite housing sector. There is also a zone of in situ accretion, which means basically self-built. This zone is a diverse collection of middle and low-income housing, and is a transitional area where people are either moving up or down the social ladder. Some neighborhoods have city-provided utilities, whereas other blocks must often rely on water and butane delivery trucks for essential services. Along the outskirts of the city lies a zone of peripheral squatter settlements, which sharply contrast with the affluent and comfortable suburbs that ring cities in the US. This zone is often a large and encircling land that is home for impoverished and unskilled workers, who are usually there due to the influx of intra-regional migrants, predominantly moving from rural to urban areas. Whether these zones are referred to as shantytowns, slums, Mexican barrios, Brazilian favelas, or the like, the homes are often built from scavenged materials and usually found behind a main ring highway known as a periférico. The streets are unpaved, there is little sanitation, if any, often there are open trenches of waste, residents carry water from long distances, and electricity is often pirated. Disamenity sectors often exist where the poorest people live, and may sometimes reach all the way toward the city core. These can be overrun by gangs and drug lords in some extreme cases. Latin America has some of the most extreme disparity between the rich and the poor in the entire world, as this image of Sao Paulo clearly indicates. Just look at the quality of the living conditions and amenities to the right, and just over the fence you see the squalid conditions of the majority. Here you see a wider view of the favelas that surround the wealthier central city area. And this image shows an even wider view. Of course, shantytowns are by no means confined to the Latin American cities. Just look at the vast slums around many South Asian cities, such as Mumbai, Karachi, and Dhaka. Back to the griffin-ford model, it also displays an industrial park, and in La Paz you can see these images of a beer brewing facility. Due to cheaper labor, lax environmental restrictions, and increased globalization, many Latin American cities are prime locations for manufacturing and production. There is also a growing phenomena in these cities toward gentrification, or the transformation of urban neighborhoods from predominantly low-income renter-occupied areas into middle and upper-class owner-occupied areas. This is most likely to occur near the CBD and elite residential area. This can often involve the rehabilitation and preservation of historical buildings. Sectors like these reflect economies that are improving. However, this is not always the case. If you recall the general layout of cities in developing countries I showed you previously, you can see the industrial and suburban growth on the outskirts of the model. But this is not reflected in the sub-Saharan African city model, sometimes called the Deblay model, after its creator and original author of our textbook. While no single model could display the vast complexities between all sub-Saharan African cities, this model shows some unique characteristics. That said, be careful not to over-memorize these models, but understand they exist mainly to indicate certain tendencies. If you understand the underlying reasons for these land uses, the models largely become common sense. So, some studies show there are often 3 CBDs. Since most of Africa was colonized, there exists what used to be a colonial CBD, which is usually the wealthiest part of the city with the most vertical development. There is also a traditional CBD, where many of the original population resided. This CBD is often inundated with single-story buildings. And finally, there is an open-air market zone where people sell their goods from stalls and the sides of streets. There are various sectors and zones, for instance, areas of mining and manufacturing. There is also a plethora of ethnic neighborhoods. Just keep in mind that the middle and upper classes are closer to the CBD, and the residences tend to get poorer further out. A city that fits this model fairly well is Lagos, the largest city in Nigeria. Or even Kinshasa, the capital of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In sum, there are a few common characteristics displayed by many of the cities in the least developed and newly industrialized countries, aka the peripheral and semi-peripheral states. They are often large, modern centers of commerce with large immigrant populations who are migrating from rural to urban regions, looking for a better life. They often possess rapid growth rates, not just from immigration, but from the natural increase. Due to the massive immigration, there are usually large squatter settlements at the outskirts of the cities. And while many cities are growing in the developing world, and some lives are improving, others are not so fortunate. These people and these cities face an uncertain future.